morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I am Kimani and I'm happy to be here. Engaged to welcome to our opening conversations, Engage around racial equity and mental health. I'm here as a part of the community outreach and training specialist at the Mental Health Association in New Jersey, and I am your co-host today. I also work for the FOC program. The Mental Health Association in New Jersey is a statewide, in case you didn't know, nonprofit organization that strives for children and adults to achieve victory over mental illness and mental health and substance substance use disorders through advocacy, education, training, and services. The FOC, or Families of Color program, addresses mental health issues on multiple levels. We create a mixture of virtual and direct family support services to increase awareness of the barriers facing families of color. I also work as a part of the PEWS program, promoting emotional wellness and spirituality. The program is there to address mental health issues within the communities of color. So we thank you for joining us today. And in just a moment, we're going to have our wonderful guest, Rev Rose Hardy. She's a minister, a clinician, a person of color, and a member of the queer community. So we're very happy to have you, Reverend Rose, and I'm going to turn it over to Faith, our co-host.
Well, thank you so much, Kimani. Great introduction. I am really happy to be here also. And you know, we always have a special show, but today's show is extra special. It's extra special for so many reasons. One in which the person that we're speaking is very knowledgeable because she wears a number of different hats, and I'll introduce her in a bit. But basically, as Kimani mentioned, Engage is here for us to have a conversation, of how we can actually alleviate some of the disparities in mental health for persons of minority communities. So one of the key things that we want to do is, what we have really make an effort to do is to really look at this issue from a number of different angles. And some of the guests, later on, you'll see how some of the guests that we're having, Kimani and myself, are learning a lot as we are pulling this together, because we didn't look at this initially when we started this Engage initiative in terms of how broad it is. We have realized that there's so many ways to actually look at this so that we can better engage individuals from the minority community in terms of their overall mental health. So it's really, really great that we're having these conversations. But conversation doesn't happen on a one-sided kind of thing. We need two people, right? Or more people. So we need your voice in all of this in order for us to really have good, deep, meaningful conversations. Because so often we have conversation, but there's surface level conversation that does really get to the really root of what we really want to accomplish. So without any further ado, I am so honored to be able to have a conversation in terms of engaging individuals from the queer community with Reverend Rose Hardy. Thank you so much for being here, Reverend Rose.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. It's just so good to be connected with the Mental Health Association again. I have history with the Mental Health Association, dear friends, yourself, Laverne Williams with PEWS, and just really grateful, excited, honored to be here. Thank you. And Kimani, it was great talking with you all beforehand and to kind of prepare me for what I think is going to be a great conversation.
Awesome. So Reverend Rose, as her title, her name says, she's a reverend, but she's not only a reverend, she's a clinician, a really good one, by the way, I must say, right? She's a clinician. She is a woman of color, as you can see. But also, she is a person who is from the queer community. And with all these hats, and I know you wear many more, but we're just talking about these 4 hats right now. I'm sure they do inform the work that you do. with your clients and with just individuals in the community. So, my first question to you, Reverend Rose, is could you briefly share how these roles or these hats that you wear inform the work that you do in the mental health community?
It's a great question. The reality is that when you are a person that can show up and people, they meet me and they might be able to look and say, oh, she's a woman. In terms of how I present, what people see, they would make that assumption. People experience me more often than not, and this has been since the time I was a little girl, as Latina.
Mm,
So I know what it's like to for people to experience me as something that I'm not. And that really started very early in my life. I had the experience of being put in a class with other Latina children because a teacher made an assumption. And I was in there for about 2, 3 days and I was asked to read and I started crying because I couldn't read the material, which was obviously for bilingual children. I always remember that. I ran home and told my parents about it and they just chuckled and laughed. I recall that story because actually throughout my adult life, I've oftentimes been assumed not to be African American, but to be Latina. Um, I share that because, again, it's what people think they see. I identify as a lesbian woman. I'm only in the last year or so beginning to embrace when people say, oh, you're queer too. And I'm like, queer had a different connotation for me growing up. But I learned, just as I learned when I would speak places, I immediately would say, I'm Rose and, I come from the African American community. I purposefully did that. I also now purposefully, when I speak, also share how I identify in terms of sexuality. I want people to see my comfort level. B, it also opens the door for people to understand that my experiences will also shape how I not only view things, but then how I influence things. And what I mean by that is, as a lesbian woman, it's not limited to how I operate in my physicality with a partner. I'm a lesbian intellectually, I'm a lesbian emotionally. All the dimensions of my being are influenced by how I identify as a self-gender, same gender loving woman. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. But in terms of my work and as a clinician, it has absolutely influenced me because I am very aware that the LGBTQIA, all the letters of the alphabet, that I'm myself again learning and experiencing. Um, I recognize that people may not be in a place where they're so comfortable to disclose who they are and how they move in the world. And I think it is very important for me to help set the atmosphere for a person to give me that information. Because if a person doesn't feel safe, if the space isn't sacred, those other influences, that identity will contribute to health and wellness and recovery. So if I don't create the space for an individual, and that's not just clientele, that also includes my colleagues, because I've been in this work 30 plus years. And if you're not okay with who you are and how you show up, and I'm not saying you disclose everything, clinicians don't disclose everything about themselves to the individuals they work with. But if you're not comfortable in your own skin with who you are, how might that show up in how you engage in the people that you're supporting? If you have internalized homophobia, how might that show up in how you help a person who comes to you and is also talking about their strained relationship with their family who can't accept them for who they are?
And that brings up my next question. I think you kind of just went straight for it. Is why is self-awareness especially important for individuals like ourselves who are working and helping others in the community? So why is that self-awareness so critical? So if you could actually continue on the vein in terms of why this particular component is critical, I'd really appreciate that.
It is so critical because, again, if your role is to support and help individuals and I don't really use the term mental illness. I use the term mental wellness and people's road to being everything that they're meant to be in the world. The reality is that if the person that's supposed to be influencing and supporting and guiding you is not comfortable in their own skin or has their own conscious or unconscious biases for whatever reason about a lot of things. This is why people will say, do you know any lesbian therapists? Do you know any gay therapists? I can only work with a person of color. Individuals who are seeking support immediately assume that the only individuals that can help them are people that look just like them, are oriented just like them, are their same gender. And guess what? It's unlikely you necessarily can find the match, especially in my mental health work. We're so underrepresented in terms of men. We're a female dominated clinic here, and more than half of the clientele are males, and so people can't always get what they want to be the person, what they're going to look like and experience to be just like them. So it becomes really important that I can't do this work with just African American lesbians. I have to be able to be sensitive to everything that shows up in the rainbow, in the fluidity, in all the ways a person might show up and sit at this desk with me if I want to support them. So if I'm not comfortable, first of all, with myself and who I see myself as in the world, how might that shape and influence how I then meet and sit with people who I'm supposed to show up without judgment? I'm supposed to show up open to hearing and meeting them where they're at. And that's a lot of things. If I think that all gay men are pedophiles, how am I going to help an individual who comes to meet with me and is struggling, I can tell is struggling with, how they identify and all the layers of that, not just sexual identity, but gender identity, masculinity. What is masculinity? It becomes all of that. So if I have this jaded, uncomfortable, homophobic, sexist attitude, I can do some real damage to people that I'm supposed to be ushering to a place of health and wellness.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that because I think most of this conversation and for us to really move ahead, I really, really believe it has to start with us individuals, us being more self-aware in terms of how we are showing up in the world and how comfortable we are around certain things. And that's okay. It's life. We're not going to be comfortable with everything, but just being honest with ourselves that, you know what? I have some challenges here and maybe I need some help or maybe I'm not the right person to at this time in my where I am at to be actually working with this person or engaging this person.
Can I just add to that as an example? I'm a kind of toot the horn of my own agency here. I work for St. Joseph's Hospital in Paterson, New Jersey, and I have a phenomenal director. Her name is Suzanne Palumbo, and she is intentional with helping a staff understand racism, how to move in anti-racism. And I'll tell you something, I think when she was on doing a whole series weekly in supervisions, and I could tell some of my peers were like, oh God, we're going to talk about racism again. And I was like, yeah, because again, unconscious stuff that we sometimes kind of push to the side, and we think, oh no, I'm okay. And I don't have any of those issues, and I can work with everybody. And yes, the world is so bad, but I'm okay. And it was great to be in an environment and to work somewhere where I had a director, a supervisor who knew that, especially with the events that have continued to go on in our world, in terms of violence against Black and brown bodies, that she was going to continue to scrape and scrape and scrape it at the surface of something, as opposed to thinking, no, we're all okay here. We all, look at us, we're multicultural. We have all different staff, rainbow staff, and no, but still having somebody courageous enough to scratch at that. So I just wanted to add that piece to our how we also operate in a world that in a community, in a country that racism still rules.
Yeah, and that's true. And it's hard. It's not easy for you to take that internal look and to say, oops,
Very hard.
really, I have issues. I have something that I need to work on here. But it's part of the human experience, which is to be a better me, better you, for us to grow, right?
Absolutely. That's how we grow
Yeah.
and get better. I believe that I became a better clinician when I fully was okay with how I identified in terms of my sexual orientation. I believe it made me a better clinician. And sometimes people are like, I also believe accepting how I move spiritually made me a better clinician. So they all intersect.
That they
They
do.
all intersect. And if you are okay in it, it elevates all those other things that you thought you already. I thought I was a great clinician before I really moved into some acceptance of some other parts of my being that were still kind of closeted, including my
Awesome.
spiritual identity.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. My next question, time is going by. Oh my gosh.
I know I get
This is
long-winded.
great
I'm sorry. I get
conversation.
excited.
This is great conversation. So, one of the things is that the queer community encompasses a broad cross section of individuals who use different terms to describe their gender, their sexuality, their physiological sex characteristics. It's just the term, I looked it up, is like it has changed. It is LGBTIQA plus. Wow, a mouthful, right? Alphabet soup, right?
Alphabet soup.
And so my question is, this can be confusing for just anyone who is not part of the community, or even for people who are in the community. Sometimes it's confusing. My
Yes.
question to you is, when in doubt, what do you do? So you're working with someone and you're okay. How do I approach this? What do you do?
Okay. Another great question and some very firsthand experience. Again, so I get a referral, and the referral says John Smith. And the person who shows up in my office for that first intake interview looks more like Jane, um, and had absolutely had these experiences. Um, when confused, comfortably ask the question. Ask a person how they identify. Now, oftentimes, and again, I get referrals from usually hospitals, so there's some real identifying information in there. So I might get information saying that this is a person trans who is a female to male, a male to female. A person identifies as no gender. I had to get to a place where I could comfortably ask the question. And guess what? They've been asked that question before. They're actually waiting sometimes and respect you more, that you would ask the question. So I might say, you know, it's John. Are you comfortable with me calling you by that name, or do you have another name that you identify with? You know, a number of years ago, when we had one of our first transgender individuals that came to our program here, I remember the staff, hopefully they won't be mad at me. They were in a tizzy about what bathroom were they going to use. And I said, how about letting them decide what bathroom they were going to use? And someone made a really good comment. They said, but I hear that there's sometimes violence against individuals who may go into the bathroom, that they're what people see doesn't match the bathroom that they should go into. And I said, that makes a lot of sense. I said, but we also have single bathrooms. So if that person doesn't want to go into the room that might have multiple stalls, or you know, they'll use the room that's a single stall. And guess what? That's what the individual did. You know, I think sometimes we want to answer questions as opposed to asking the individual what would make them comfortable. It is not our responsibility to out individuals. If that individual wants to, in a group, and again, I have seen this here in our program, an individual will share what they want to share. And it's 2022. People are not blown out the water, that there are people that how they identify may not be how you identify. The best answer is to feel confident and comfortable asking the individual, you know, this is the language I use. I tell individuals that I make sure they know things like we have a zero tolerance for any type of bullying or abuse, because it is not uncommon that I see in that person's records or in my interviewing and assessing, let's say, their childhood and growing up, they will talk about that they were the target of abuse. They were picked on. And I may say, why were you picked on? And it opens the door for that individual to say, when I was a child growing up, I struggled with, I could tell I wasn't, how I felt what people saw on the outside isn't what was going on with me on the inside. They talk about their dysphoria, they talk about it, and it just creates the sacred space to let a person see that you want to be educated. A lot of what I've learned from the individuals, as opposed to, though I do a lot of educating, reading my own materials, but I've learned a lot about who people are from asking them who they are. And they're just part of that one person doesn't represent the whole community. That's the other mistake we make. I have to say this. I tell people, I'm a woman. I don't represent all women. I'm African American. I don't represent all African American women. And I'm a lesbian. I do not represent all lesbians. There's a whole lot of variables. There's socioeconomics. There's how I was raised. Culturally, my spiritual and religious influence. So you have to see who that person is and not make them the poster child of a community, because it's a mistake. And I've had it done to me. I've had people think, oh, well, this is, I'm like, no. I represent who I am, what has influenced me, how I've been impacted by loving family, supportive friends. I've seen the opposite of that. And so one size doesn't fit all. Ask people the questions.
Love that. Love that. Ask questions. And, that goes to my next question that I had was about, in order to engage someone to really engage someone and have them feel safe, you have to respect people. And your answer to my previous question is kind of bordering on that. That when we ask questions, we're not making assumptions, and we are respecting people by hearing from them what is important to them. I'd like for you to go back to the transition, talk about transgendered individuals and children. I mean, in terms of even using that example in terms of what do you what a person is called or to be able to be showing respect to them. So I don't know if you want to go there to kind of talk about some of that.
I, I, I I'd love to go there because I think that my brothers and sisters in the trans community, um, who I think my introduction to trans was as a student in college and taking a human sexuality course at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And that week we were introduced to a person of the trans experience. And I was just like, I was already identifying as a same gender loving woman, but I'd never met a transgender person. And it just opened my eyes. And I think as I got older and matured, I always had a sensitivity to what felt like in the alphabet soup. The trans community, as well as the bisexual, seemed to be the kind of like the bad guys in the community. What do you mean you don't identify with your body? People seemed like an already marginalized community. Lesbian and gay people were further ostracizing, transgender individuals and bisexual individuals also. And so what really happened for me with the trans community was I developed an affinity and wanted to learn and grow and know more information. And here's what happened, because this is one of my expressions, God has jokes. I was married quite a number of years ago to an individual. I married a woman, and fabulous, male identified lesbian. But after a few years, our marriage came to an end. In that marriage, I have a son, because my then partner, my then wife, had a son, and he came into my life when he was 9. Our marriage ended, but I maintained a relationship with my son, which was phenomenal. That was the gift of a marriage, even if it didn't continue. I'm sharing this because within a couple of years after my divorce, my my then spouse reached out to me and let me know that they were transitioning, female to male. Um, and I thought to myself, that makes sense. In retrospect, there were things that it made sense, and I actually supported it. I had tremendous concerns for my son, who at that time was in high school. I had tremendous concerns about what would be available to the child of a transgender person. Because a lot of times we have support systems in place for the adults, for the families, for the siblings, but what was available for children? Because I wanted to make sure, because there was a lot going on there, and people needed to support him because everybody knew that my ex was transitioning, and all the concerns and feelings people had about that. But I felt like who else could talk to besides myself to a young person about what would this mean. Wait, I don't have a Mother's Day with my mother anymore. I can't call my mother mom anymore. How if when I get married, where will they fall in the ceremony? And people may think like, nah, that's not a big deal. It's a huge deal. And I have seen the impact, not just in my own then family, that transitioned to something different, but you still stay connected because you have a child that you share, as two individuals, even if the marriage ends. But it was profound, and it was important that I made sure that he got what he needed. And so I shared that experience because I think sometimes we don't think about the other individuals who will love that person. My son never stopped loving his mother and still loves his mother. but there were ways that he needed to be supported because something significant that would have to change his language and how he then interfaced with someone, because it was, transgender people, if I'm not mistaken, oftentimes will say that there's a death to the birth person and there's a new person. So I had a son that had to understand that there was a death, but that person still is alive. I could go on about that and on and on and on, but I won't for time. But I think a lot of times we only, when we're thinking about inclusivity and how do we help people, there's also other people called family, friends, who may be going through their own crisis of now, how do I deal with this? And I've seen it with lots of individuals who struggle with understanding, like, but how can they do this? The church as well. Why would you reject the body God gave you? I hear those conversations, and helping people to understand, how is it so important that you understand, or is it a piece of the puzzle, but is it more important to support this individual that's making a courageous decision so that they can live their life and be healthy and be able to be at peace and be able to now flourish in their identity. And there is nothing more marvelous than seeing somebody that you care for, that you love, that's a colleague, how I know people that now they come to their job and people are like, how do you show people that you love them? And they've made a decision that is the only decision that they could have made for themselves. But how can we also support the other individuals that may feel like they're collateral damage?
Mm. Wow. Wow, that is powerful. And you said a lot in that to answer that question. And so just highlights that part of respecting someone. It's not only asking questions and being present for them, but realize that not only are they going through what they're going through, but to be able to also be able to embrace the whole person, not just the individual, their family, of their family also, and to be understanding of that, and that children. So often when we're having these discussions, we forget about the children and the
Yeah,
impact they
yeah.
are having, that it may be having. They may not have the language to say, well, depends on the age, what they're emotionally, what they're going through, but it's important, especially as service providers, for us to be aware of that, so that we can be in a space where we can ask the right questions to be able to help.
By the same token, because I'm spinning now because I'm
Hmm.
in it and I made it personal. By the same token, don't make pathology where there is none,
Exactly. That's a good
because
point.
because there are plenty of people being raised by same gender loving people, raising children that are not the same complexion. I mean, I have a son that all he knew was being raised by two women. So
Hmm.
there was no pathology there for him. And
Right.
so, in a world where he's hearing like, oh God, like you didn't have a male figure. Oh God, like the irony, right? The reality is that we also have to be careful to be mindful of children and family and what's going on. I'll give you an example. I know an individual that I'm gonna just say an educator, who felt like, well, the problem for the kid must be that they have two moms. And I was like, no, that was their homophobia. That was
Mm.
and I can say that because I knew the individual. Their homophobia. So when a kid was having problems in school, they decided it was because they had two moms. So that's an example. I'm saying we have to be very careful not to make pathology or issues when that's not the issue. It's our problem. We're the
Right.
one that's having a hard time that a boy is being raised by two women. We're the one that's having a problem that the Caucasian couple adopted an African American boy. Maybe that Caucasian lesbian couple, really that's who was available and they embraced that child. We do that thing too. We get all mad about the racial sometimes identity. Love is love.
Mm-hmm.
Love is love. And what we're charged to do as clinicians or anyone that cares is to support people and embrace people and be thrilled that they were able to get that child. They've been waiting 10 years to be able to have a child put in their care, to be able to be elated that there's just so many dynamics. Oh, storylines are coming into my head, and I know we don't have time. Can I give just one more example of, again?
One more.
I'm so sorry. I'm looking
No,
at
no, but I know your wealth, and this is awesome. So thank you.
because these are real scenarios. These are real life scenarios. I once had to really be there for a fellow who is a friend, was a classmate back in the day, and because he was lamenting that his legacy would end, that he had two daughters and a son, and so the last name phenomenon, the last name, and he was really lamenting that because his son was gay. And he was lamenting that the name would die. And this was intense for him, old school Italian, let me just say it. And he was lamenting. And I looked at him and I said, could you embrace that? He accepted his son. He loved his son. Could he embrace that someday his son would partner and maybe raise a son, and that would be the continuity of the legacy? And I'll never forget his face. It was like, that can happen. I'm like, yeah, like a little education that that men are raising children. And I said, your legacy isn't going to die because your son is gay. And it so set him free, because he loved his son, but he couldn't wrap his mind around that his son could have a kid and they could raise him and the legacy would continue. It's our thinking, and sometimes it's closed, and we can be vessels to help open people's thinking about what is family. What is family? All right, I'll stop because I'm getting
Well,
excited.
I mean, what a perfect point. What a perfect way to actually end this segment. I mean, this we could go on and on and on and on because as I mentioned, you're a wealth of information. But I love the stories that you intertwined it in your answers to the question, because it made it more real for us, right? And thank you so much, Reverend Rose, for actually being so candid, not only about the work that you do, but also including your own life and giving and speaking from that point too. So thanks for being transparent. This was a great show, and we're going to end the recording at this point, and we are going to be opening up the floor for questions. So remember, engage is about having this conversation, deep conversation. So this is your time to open up and have this conversation. Thank you.